Welcome back to Pink Slip Pavilion, where every Wednesday we share a Pink Slip to Power Move story. And this week's story comes from Jen Mbanu. This is From Healthcare Hustle to Whole Self Healing.
This pink slips the start, not the end.
Welcome to Pink Slip Pavilion, Jen. We're so excited to have you here to hear your story. Welcome to the pavilion.
Thank you, Ashley. Who would have thought that getting a couple of pink slips throughout my career would land me here talking to you?
I
So thank you for
know.
the invite.
Well, I know your story is going to help some of our listeners, probably many of our listeners. I had a sneak peek, but let's start with the most important question. Have you ever gotten a pink slip?
I absolutely have. In fact, throughout my 20-year healthcare career, I received 3 pink slips. So I am very familiar with the emotions and the uncertainty that is attached to this sometimes, and also feel like it's a lot of opportunity. So I guess that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, I love that. Let's unpack that. But let's start with where were you? So you mentioned you have 3 pink slips in your career. Let's start with number one. Where were
Yeah.
you? And let's set the stage for kind of how these unfolded for you.
So I began my career in the clinical healthcare setting. And so when I began the job where I received my first pink slip, I did have 5 years of clinical healthcare experience. I then went to grad school and did a health policy degree. And it turned out when I got done, pharmaceutical companies were hiring public health degrees. And so I thought I would end up at the CDC or a public health department or another clinical care setting. It turned out I went to work for a pharmaceutical company who had just launched a drug which was really great for patients at the time who were struggling with hepatitis C. And so it was this opportunity to learn about a disease state and enter a new industry and do work that I'd never done before. And it was exciting. And it gave me that kind of entrepreneurial bug because of the way I was handed a territory and told, here's what you have to accomplish. Here's the objective. How you do it within guardrails is largely up to you. And I found that to be so exhilarating to be able to just kind of go out and do things my own way in that very first kind of corporate position.
Rare in early stage jobs too. So that's really cool that that was the first experience. So how did the layoff unravel?
After about 14 months of being out in the territory, raising awareness about hepatitis C, increasing rates of screening and testing, and supporting linkage to care, thinking I was doing this just fabulous job and changing lives and helping patients make foundational change. And then one day you get a phone call and it turns out your entire department is being let go. And what I learned very early on was, oh, this is fun and exciting work for a public health brain, but we're non-revenue generating. So the first people to go when the market shifts, when another company kind of comes as a competitor on their heels, we're the first to be let go. And that was that first experience. And even though now I know that it's just the nature of the business, that every 2 years or so, these programs are going to cycle through and you do great work while you're in it, and then you move on. But at the time, it felt really personal.
Absolutely, especially because we're kind of raised to believe that you get a job and you stick with it, and 40 years later, you retire, or 50 years. I guess I should do the math better there, but we're told you stick. That is how jobs work, or at least that's how our generations were taught, and that's changed a lot. So I think it's interesting the perspective of every 2 years, you know, now you're going to move on to something new. But had you known that in the beginning, that probably would have been really helpful.
Absolutely. And, what felt like oh, wow, I have to start over again every 2 years. Now that I'm an entrepreneur and a founder, I know that that prepared me. It set the stage for always working on something new and exciting and starting a project. And just when you get your hands wrapped around it, something's going to change and you have to keep that agility and that flexibility and keep your vision for what you want your career to be, but be very flexible in how it shows up and how it unfolds.
I love the through line of how it's already turned into a blessing. But I do want to stop at your other two pink slips too. Similar stories or different experiences?
Very similar in the sense that they were full department layoffs. And so after that first one, it stopped feeling personal. But the second time, I was in the same disease state doing similar work, but this time I got to lead a team. And so that was the first time where I thought, okay, I got laid off after a couple of years of doing this really exciting work. But then the next company recognized it and they said, oh, you already know the space, you already know the organizations and what moves the needle on this work. Why don't you come on board? And they took a chance on me as a new manager. And I got to be part of a leadership team that hired, trained, and managed, led 30 individuals, public health nurses across the entire United States. And so that's when I kind of started coming into my own, where be open to what comes next, because it actually could be one step better or one step bigger than you thought it would be. So that was the second one. When that work ended, it didn't feel personal, but it was still a disappointment because then I had 7 or 8 people on my team who loved the work they were doing and they were invested in the patients and the clinics and the community-based organizations that they had been working with. And I had to be the one to let them know that this work was coming to a close and we were all moving on. And so there was this new element of kind of disappointment, even though I knew I would be okay, and so would my team. The final layoff was my last one 3 years ago. And at that point, I realized that understanding about mid-career that there was no loyalty when it came to companies. That as soon as the stock price dipped or the market shifted or the winds changed in some way, the non-revenue generating team was going to be the first to be shown the door. The third and final one, I had been planning and waiting for it. And so I had started to do things that would support an off ramp. What was my exit strategy? If I didn't want to always be asking someone for the next opportunity, building up a team, creating this body of work, and then being told, we no longer need this. What if I built something for myself? And so that third and final layoff was actually the blessing because I was able to take the narrative and the story that I had created over 20 years and start to ask myself, what's the impact I want to make? What conversations do I want to be a part of? And that just opened up a whole new world.
I love that. So if you had to go from mindset from one, two, three, and now, what would you say was your biggest kind of takeaway of how your mindset shifted from that first moment of, oh my gosh, I'm losing my job to now being a founder?
I would say one of the things that comes to mind is not making your career your identity. And it's
Huge.
hard to do because there are a number of things attached to it. It's the first question people often ask you at networking events or in social settings. It's, oh, what do you do? And so there's something attached to the work that you do. It's how you support yourself and pay your bills. And so every time that happens, you're kind of like, okay, I've got to figure this out. The mindset shift went from personal affront to disappointment to, oh, this was always part of the plan, and understanding that it was all part of the narrative that brought me to where I was supposed to be. And so I think for everyone, whether you're trying to get to a certain point in your company or in your industry, or you want to try on something new and do something for yourself, whatever that looks like, just know that all those steps before, the pink slips, the things, the times when things were going well, they all were part of building, putting one brick on top of the other until one day you wake up and you're like, oh, I built something, which is exciting.
I love that perspective. And I think that's a really important perspective for people right now because you're often in the moment feeling all of the hurt and all of the challenge. And it's hard to see it as this is one more brick that gets me closer to wherever I'm meant to be when you're in that moment and the bills are coming in and you're just like, oh, I don't know what's next. So let's talk about your blessings because I feel like that's a great segue. What blessings would you have missed out on had you never gotten that first layoff or the second or the third? What are kind of those key things that really have been life-changing for you that you would not have been able to be blessed with had you stayed at that first, second, or third job?
Yeah. There are two things I really love about my life right now. One is I fully own my time, and that is a luxury that you can't buy. It's hard to get. You usually have to pay your bill, your dues, and it takes a long time to get there. But getting to this place where my partner and I have built something and now we own our time and we can sit and have coffee for an hour and a half in the morning. And then if I want to work out, I can. And it doesn't mean I'm not working long hours. I'm working longer hours than I was working when I could clock in and clock out and was working for someone else. But I own the way it looks. I own when and how I work. The second piece is I had a lot of jobs I really loved, and I had some bosses that I loved showing up for and did a lot of really cool work. But now I wake up and I'm on fire about what I get to do every day, creating and building and trying to help other women with their foundational health. I never felt like that when I was waking up and doing something in the pharmaceutical industry. Now, if it had gone well, if that first company or maybe the second one, I would have stayed there for a long time. That second company where I was brought in as a part of that leadership team, even when that program ended, I fought with bloody fingernails to stay at that company. Flew up to headquarters. I was not living anywhere near headquarters, but flew up, interviewed for every job that I was not even remotely qualified for. And because I had done a great job in that role, they gave me the courtesy of allowing me to interview and to go through a lot of these processes. But at the end of the day, I did not land. And that crushed me almost more than the initial layoff because I had received a pink slip before. I knew it wasn't personal this time. We were non-revenue generating, the tides were turning. Sorry to see you go. But it seemed as though they wanted to keep me. And when they decided not to, that was kind of a shock to my system. And it took me kind of a little bit of time to recover. And when I went back to an individual contributor role where I could go to work and travel and come home and the buck didn't stop with me anymore, that was comforting for a while. And then entered the very last role where I knew immediately and from the start that when this one was over, I was going to pause. And so I can't remember what your initial question was or if I answered it, but the blessing was that I would have stayed at a number of these companies, I guess to put it that way, where it was good enough and I was thriving enough. And maybe I wasn't on fire and owning my time, but I was compensated well for my time and worked with people that were the smartest people in the business. And it was fun. So I probably would have stayed if no one had handed me that pink slip. I would have stayed until it's kind of like that. The analogy I'm thinking of is being a frog in water and it starts to boil. It was, I would have stayed in that water for a really long time. And it wasn't until that final pink slip that I paused and I realized just how burnt out and overwhelmed and overstimulated I was, that it was, oh, thank goodness that I don't have to log in tomorrow and do this again. And so that became the blessing.
It's so interesting because I hear this from many of my guests that have taken the entrepreneur route. I obviously took that route as well. And it's so interesting because you really don't understand how burnout you are. You really don't understand your state of existence, I feel like, until all of a sudden you have the time of a layoff and you take it upon yourself to go, what do I want next? And you check in. What have I been saying no to? What have I been neglecting in my own health? There's so many things, but we are so in our work. And like you said, you go to an event or you meet new people. What do you do? It's one of those questions here in the US that we lead with. And so I love the call out of really you stepping into your freedom and waking up on fire and owning your time. And like you said, long hours. It's definitely not one of those things where you just decide to wake up whenever you feel like. But that owning of that time and that freedom and that entrepreneurial spirit, I love that you're highlighting you wouldn't have gotten there without the pink slip because I think a lot of entrepreneurs feel that way. I keep hearing that from my guests, but it feels like in the moment life is falling apart and it doesn't always feel like it's actually opening up so that you can fly because you've been kind of caged and stuck.
Right. And I think that's what's so important about this conversation that you're trying to have, right? And creating the space for that. Because I think when you get handed that pink slip and it can feel like your world is coming apart, and that's a natural place to be because you can't see the other side of it. And so being able to listen to other people who have gone through it once or twice and got to the other side of it and can kind of say, hey, here's what's going on over here. I think it's so important and it's going to help so many people.
Thank you. I'm excited to have these conversations and have this conversation with you. So if you could go back in time and you could talk to Jen back then, doesn't matter which layoff that you want to go back to, but you have wisdom now that you didn't have then. What would you want that version of yourself to know?
I would absolutely say stay present, the
Mm,
present moment. When you get laid off, the past and the future will come spiraling around at such a rapid pace where you're asking all the questions of why me? Was it something I did? Was it something I said? Was my work not as good as I thought it was? Is the work I was doing for the last 2 years so unimportant? All of these questions you start digging into the past and how it happened and why it happened. And sure, do an autopsy and make sure that you can take a lesson if there's one to be had. The other place you can find yourself spiraling is in the future with my bills. How long is it going to take me to find the next thing? Am I going to be able to advance or at least make a lateral move? Or am I going to have to take a step back? There are all of these worries and anxieties about what comes next. And I think if I could say anything to my younger self, it would be that mostly that's unhelpful and just get up every day, keep as much routine as you can, do things that nourish and fuel you. And it sounds cliche, but this too shall pass. It always does.
powerful, super powerful. Now, wrapping up to the guest that's listening to this, right? The audience who's afraid of a layoff that might be coming because we live in a very unstable world currently, who's maybe walking through this right now and dealing with these self-identity and emotions, or maybe someone who hasn't quite healed from a past pink slip. What would you want them to know and leave this conversation with?
Here's what I think is the good news. You opened with the roles we were used to. We thought that we would go to a company and be able to stay until we were ready to leave, or maybe you'd even have a full career somewhere. The good news is the future of work is changing anyway, whether we like it or not, at a very rapid pace. I have kids who are just graduated from college, in college, and graduating from high school, entering college. And when I tell you trying to guide and mentor kids who are at that stage, trying to pick their majors and what they're going to do 5, 10 years from now, I think the good news for anyone who's struggling right now, who has received a pink slip and doesn't know what the next move is, the entire workforce is likely to be feeling that in the coming years. And so if you stay true to yourself and your commitment and your loyalty is simply to your own learning, development, networking, growing into the person you're meant to be, what are you good at that only you can do in this way, and just keep building and pouring into it and know that it will work out the way it's meant to. And what I've always found is I often wake up And as long as I'm intentional and I ask myself, most of the time, my life looks like what I was wishing and hoping for 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And we can miss it because we're sad that this time in our life ended and it's time to look to the future. But if we can feel the emotion, move through it, and then get excited about what's next, I think that changes the game, quite frankly.
Chills, chills. Well, thank you so much, Jen, for joining me in the pavilion, for being vulnerable, for sharing your story. I know this is going to impact people in the audience. So thank you for being willing to join the pavilion and this movement of helping people understand that a layoff is really just a power move in disguise if you're willing to embrace it.
Oh, I love that. Thank you, Ashley, for having me. A power move in disguise. Yes,
Yeah. All right. Hopefully, we'll see you again in the pavilion in the future. Thanks so much, Jen.
absolutely. Take care.
Well, there you have it. More proof that your pink slip is really just one more brick in the beautiful life that you're building. Even if it doesn't feel beautiful in the moment, there is always something on the other side of this season, and I look forward to seeing what you build. If you want to connect with Jen, all of her contact information will be in the description of this episode. And of course, make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button so you never miss a story. We're here every Wednesday, proving one story at a time that a pink slip is a power move in disguise. I'll see you next week.
This pink slips the style.